And welcome back to the Financially Simple Experience. So today, let's answer the question that has been in every boardroom for financial advisors across the country, the question that will probably even be at some sort on the Thanksgiving dinner table later this fall. And that is inflation approaching? It's a popular question these days, inflation. I'm starting to hear about it on the media. I'm starting to read about it in the journals like the Wall Street Journal and the various things that I love to read. I'm starting to see this word crop up. So today I want to do a deep dive into inflation. I've never done this one before, never spoke in detail about inflation, so this is a fun one for me. It's actually answering a listener question. So maybe you have a question that you would love to hear me try to tackle. Hey, drop us a line on social media. You can find us on just about any major channel out there. Find Financially Simple or Justin Goodbread and just drop us a question. Hey, brother, can you answer this question? So the question was, hey, Justin, is inflation approaching? If so, how can we prepare? So let's talk through inflation a little bit. First of all, we've got to define our term. What is inflation? Okay, let's get super simple here. It's a measurement measuring the rise of prices over time. It's really all it is. It's a measurement measuring the rise of prices over time. Okay, well, where do we find this term at? Well, the Consumer Price Index measures the average inflationary rate. You may hear this referred to as the CPI. So if you're listening to Bloomberg, you may hear someone say the CPI or the CP index, depending on how they want to abbreviate it, which is the Consumer Price Index. And all it does is it measures the inflationary rate every year by year or quarter by quarter over time. So who controls it? Well, the Federal Reserve tries to control it. They try to use a monetary policy to achieve roughly about a 2% inflationary rate per year. They want to see prices, the average prices, increase at roughly about 2% a year. That's roughly the number they're shooting for. So how do they do this? Well, there's a business cycle that we often look at. It's called 4 points on the business cycle, or 4 stages, if you will. One is expansion, which is whenever the economy is growing. Then there's the peak. In other words, it stopped growing and it's kind of just sitting there at a peak level, almost like a mountaintop. Then there's contraction, which is where the economy is shrinking. And then there's a trough, and that's where the bottom of the mountain right before it turns up to the next mountaintop. So if you hike any type of terrain, I love to hike. I do that every fall in the Rockies or even over here in the Appalachian Mountains. You'll start at the bottom of the mountain and you'll go through expansion. You'll start climbing the mountain. You'll reach the top. There's the peak. Then you go down the other side. That's contraction. Then when you reach the bottom right before you turn up again, there's the trough. So that's the basic business cycle that just about every economy around the world goes through. So through this cycle, the Federal Reserve, or the monetary policy, the central banks of economies are trying to measure their particular target. But why? Well, some economists view inflation as good for consumers and businesses. And you may say, well, that doesn't make any sense. I'm paying more today for a price of goods or services than I was in the past. Well, when it comes to the supply of money, if there is basically, economists believe that inflation comes when the supply of money, when there's more money than there is the demand for good. Now, right now in the United States, as I'm recording this, there is more money than supply, okay? There's more money. We're sitting on a ton of cash right now. We can barely get product. I have a family member that's in the swimming pool business, and he can barely get chlorine. Thank God we stocked up on chlorine before this downturn, but he can't get chlorine right now. So there's enough money to buy it, but the demand is too high. So inflation occurs when the supply of money is greater than the demand for money. Inflation is viewed as positive because it can help boost the consumer demand and consumption, which drives economic growth. And this is where John Maynard Keynes comes into play. You may have heard him for some time period. He comes in and he says, look, some inflation is good because it helps prevent the paradox of thrift. The paradox of thrift. And that's a term that he's used over time. Basically, it's delayed consumption. In other words, we're not going to spend our money. So inflation causes people to spend their money. Okay? But why does this even matter to us? What is the implication? Well, ultimately for you and I as business owners, the increase of inflation is going to decrease the value of our dollar. It's going to decrease our buying power. So a can of gasoline when I was a kid was just under 50 cents a gallon. Today, the same fuel, a little bit different. You know, we used to have regular unleaded. Now we have unleaded. We had regular gas. Now we have unleaded and ethanol and all these other things. But for the most part, gas, let's just use that as a broad term, is $3.50 a gallon as of today when I fill my truck up. So it's moved up roughly $3 per gallon over 30 some odd years, 40 years almost. So inflation is going to impact us. Now, as a sidebar, I just shot a really cool video, and I've written a blog post about it on why we should have a very long, low-interest mortgage. In other words, a 30-year mortgage with very low interest. If you understand inflation and the way that dollars work, a long mortgage makes a lot of sense from growing wealth. You might want to check that video out. You might want to do the math on it yourself. So it's going to impact us. Inflation over our lifetime is going to impact us, but that's not the question that we're dealing with. Whenever someone says, hey, is inflation here? What they're concerned about is significant inflationary trends. You know, like in the 80s when we saw inflation move pretty heavy. So is inflation here? Well, there's some indicators for inflation. There's some things we can look at. One is capacity constraints. In other words, too much money chasing too few resources. Aha. Too much money. In other words, people have a lot of money, but there's just not enough resources for them to buy. Are we there? Yeah, we are. We are now for whatever reason. For the closing of the economy last year with COVID, whenever we were dealing with that COVID situation. Right now we're dealing with a technological constraint, a chip constraint where many cars are not able to be manufactured, and now computers are going to be affected by this chip shortage. So there's too much money. We have money to burn, we have money to spend, but we can't get the resources. That is an indication that inflation is here. Whenever you see the money supply increasing, in other words, banks lending more money, go back in your mind's eye, if you paid attention or if you ever focused on this, back in the 2009 financial crisis. I can remember we owned a landscape company back even in 2000, 97, 2000, 2001, even before the tech bubble crisis. And it seemed like everybody and their brother was buying or building spec houses where I grew up in South Georgia, buying land, building developments. I mean, people who worked at UPS stores were quitting their job. They've never built a house a day in their life, going out and becoming a contractor overnight. And they made money because bank lending was loose. Banks were lending a lot of money. Happened the same time back in 2007, 8, and 9. That's why we run into the mortgage crisis. People who should never qualify for certain types of loans were qualifying. I can remember I had a client that was able to get a $2.5 million construction loan. They didn't have a, as my grandma would say, they didn't have a pot to pee in, son. It was just loose money. Are we there now? Well, we're starting to see the banks loosen up a little bit, more so than they were a couple of years ago. So we have an increased money supply. You see increased deficits. Well, what's a deficit? It's when we're spending more money than we're making. Look at the federal government. We're running a deficit every year, and it's increasing, especially last year through COVID. Last year in COVID, we spent as a country significantly more money than we brought in. One of the largest deficits in the history of our country. And it was funded by the central bank. That's an indication of inflation, or it's coming. You start to see a change in consumption habits. I was paying attention to the purchasing of boats. Here in East Tennessee, we're surrounded by beautiful lakes everywhere. And friends, I got to tell you, there's nothing more pleasant or more tranquil than sitting on a boat in the evening time on a summer day in East Tennessee whenever it's about 9:30 at night and the sun's still up and it's about 70 to 90 degrees depending on that particular day, and just watching the water calm to a sheet of glass. There's nothing more peaceful than that. Watching lightning bugs come across the water and just glisten as the sun works over the western horizon or the western mountain range. So because of that tranquility, people purchase lots of boats around us. Man, I've spoken to boaters who have these fancy ski boats and wake skate boats or wake surf boats, whatever you call it. that paid $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 who are now selling their same boats that they previously paid 3 or 4 years earlier for a greater price than what they paid for 3 or 4 years earlier. They're selling for more than what they bought them for, because people who never entered the boating world are now buying these ridiculously expensive boats, in my opinion. But it's a change in consumption habits. That's another indication of inflation. And finally, can we just say stimulus? Stimulus? Come on. Seriously. Can the government stimulate the economy even more? Government spending is a stimulation. And with too much government spending, you know you're going to have inflation. There's too much money in the supply chain, which is what has occurred over the last little bit. There's a lot of money. I'm seeing small businesses sitting on more cash now than they've ever sat on in their life because of the way the stimulus has worked. So those are some indications, and there's many more. Friends, there are many more. Those are just 5 indications that I'm giving you that show that, hey, inflation is here or not. There's some that are arguing right now that what we're simply facing is just a restarting of the economy and that prices will quickly rebound, or they'll quickly fall, I should say. Price of a 2x4, I was talking to a contractor this morning and talking about their business, and in their particular area of the country, a 2x4, 16-foot 2x4, which is a common piece of material for building, it used to run somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 for a 16-foot 2x4. Today, they're about $22 a board. Now, they're starting to see the prices drop a little bit because of demand is decreasing and now supply chain is increasing. But nonetheless, some would argue that, hey, we're not quite in inflationary trends, but this is just a result of shutting the economy down. Regardless, whether we're in inflation right now or not, there are some responses that we can do as business owners to deal with inflation. First, let's talk about our investments. Whenever we're dealing with investments, we want to look at Treasury Inflation Protection Securities. They're called TIPS. It's a type of a bond, or Series I savings bonds. And there's a reason for that. As if you remember the basic seesaw effect of a bond, when interest rates are rising, the bond price starts to drop. When inflation is causing interest rates to move up, bond price starts to drop. So we want to have Treasury Inflation Protection Securities, or Series I savings bonds. That's one move you can make in your investment account. Another one you can use is you can use non-cash flow generating assets. We call them often alternative type of assets inside your portfolio. You can use gold. I'm going to say it, Bitcoin or antiques or art or other collectibles. Because during times of inflationary trends, often alternative assets will increase in value. Now, is that always the case? No. We know that. Past performance is not indicative of future results, and any assertion to the contrary is a federal offense. We get that. I'm just talking about general rules here. See, prices change year by year with these type of commodities and non-traditional assets or contrarian type of purchases. But they're not cash flow generating. So traditionally, many investment advisors say, hey, avoid these. But during inflationary times, it may not be a bad idea for you to consider using some alternatives in your portfolio. This is where you talk to your investment advisor. If you don't have one, hey, reach out to our team. Our team can customize a specific investment policy statement for you that can determine if Bitcoin is even applicable in your portfolio. Who knows? Who knows? That's for you and your advisor to consider. You also want to purchase assets in your portfolio with cash flows that can grow. So as inflation increases, we want to have the ability for cash flow to increase. So an example on that is real estate. I love real estate. I think real estate's an amazing asset class that you can use to create leverage and spread and buy a lot of assets with a little bit of money. Stocks are the same way. For example, dividend paying stocks often are often a wise decision to use during times of inflationary trends. Again, that's not a recommendation. Talk to your advisor. Is it always the case? No, it's not. I'm going to say it again. It's not always the case, but it's something you may want to consider. So when you're looking at your portfolio, so to speak, now's the time to start considering having conversations with your investment advisor to say, hey, is my portfolio positioned to my risk level, that it's in alignment with my investment policy statement, that helps me reach my goals? Those all need to be together. And if it is, great. If you don't have a clue, reach out to us. This is what we do. We can help you with that. Okay, so that's our portfolio. But what about our businesses? If inflation attacks, what do we do as business owners? Often our largest asset on our balance sheet, our personal balance sheet, is our business. Well, we need to watch our pricing very closely, very closely. So as inflation comes, the expenses or the cost of goods, if we're buying supplies, or the expenses that we incur in our nature of business, it's going to increase if inflation comes. For example, the price of gasoline is going to grow in an inflationary time. I've already given an example. When I was a kid, it was under 50 cents a gallon. Now it's well over 50 cents a gallon. But in our business, one of the things we can control, we can't really control the expenses, the cost that we're going to pay, but we can control the charge that we're going to pass on to our consumers. So we were consulting with a particular business owner, and we were asking about their fee increases. And we said, hey, have you considered fee increases of your particular products over the last 9 months? And they had not. Like, brother, look at this. It's actually a female business owner, so I probably should say sister, right? I say brother to everybody because everybody's my brother. I like everybody. And we're like, hey, check this out. Had you increased your cost of your service to at least match the increase in your pricing of your supplies, then your profit would have maintained. And based on where they were headed, they were working the same rate but making less money. We're in business to make money. So one of the things as business owners we can check is we often can't control our expenses. We can't. The cost of goods are often what they are, but we can control our pricing. So you want to keep a handle on your pricing, especially now, especially during times of inflationary trends. So you may have to get creative. You may have to put some metrics inside your bids or inside your proposals that compensate for increasing inflationary trends as things move forward, depending on what industry that you're in. Perhaps you're in an industry that's on a leading indicator and you're starting to see prices now start to fall back, as in the construction field right now. We're starting to see some prices fall. Well, maybe you're too late. Maybe you need to adjust the price at this point or just eat it. I have a client who's going to have to eat it. It's actually not a client, I shouldn't say. As a friend who's going to eat it. They wouldn't listen to me when I said, hey, you might want to check your prices. Oh, well, can't help everybody. But he wouldn't listen, and now he's going to eat some cost. Let me illustrate the point by saying this. I can remember when tissues, that you blow your nose with, were reasonable. Now they're $2 up in the price of a box of tissues. I can remember when Roman noodles, the college food of champions that we all have had in our life. I can remember when they were about $1.50 less than what they are now. As we move through this time period, one of the things that we can focus on is how do we move through this time period? I don't like that. Let me say it this way. In the 2008 recession, I remember vividly what people were doing. We began hoarding cash. We began trying to protect, almost like the sandcastle effect, protect what we have. Friends, now's the time to stockpile cash. Now's the time to start stockpiling assets. Maybe not inventory. You may be behind the 8 ball right now on that one. But now's the time to start stockpiling, because if we are nearing a major inflationary trend, then perhaps, just perhaps, if we understand the cycle, we were already through expansion. We may be quickly approaching the peak. I don't know. No one has a crystal ball. The time to buy, whether it's another business, whether it's an asset like a piece of real estate, whether it's an investment, whether it's inventory that you're going to stock up on, the time to buy is in contraction and ultimately the trough. But that's also the time whenever people don't want to do it. I'm reminded, as us having our conference room here, Warren Buffett's statement. I'll butcher it every time, but nonetheless, it goes similar to this. When people are fearful, be greedy. When people are greedy, be fearful. Right now, there's a lot of greed going on. A lot of people doing things. Whenever you can go sit down at a fast food restaurant and the person who sees investors on your shirt starts talking about how they're making it big in the stock market, oh, man. I'm not saying that a novice can't do it. That's not what I'm saying. But whenever you're hearing it everywhere, we need to be a little wise to that. We need to be wise to that. So this is where I'm going to recommend you talk to your advisor. You talk to your board of advisors, your consultants, your team. Again, this is not investment advice. By no means. I have not considered your specific risk tolerance. I don't know any of that stuff. All I'm saying is if inflation is approaching, if it is, then you can position your life, your business, your portfolio to prepare to deal with inflation. And through a time of a trough, through a time of contraction in the business cycle, that's whenever gains are made. That's when you position yourself to get ahead. If you don't know how to do that, this sounds foreign to you, reach out to us. Again, this is what we do with the Heritage team. So friends, I realize life is hard. I heard a business owner, he let a string of profanity fly out a mile long that I've never heard a business owner say before. And I started laughing. He wasn't saying it toward me. He was saying it to the circumstances. And once he said it and I started giggling, he started breaking down. He started laughing. And he's like, Justin, I've never dealt with this. This is hard. Yeah, life is hard sometimes. Seems like we get right through 2020 and we get our feet underneath us, and now we can't get the supplies. This guy was just needing a sheet of plywood to finish the job up, and he couldn't find any in his town where he lives. It was kind of comical when we started laughing about it. Yeah, things are hard, and it's tough sometimes, but man, aren't we blessed? Aren't we blessed? We sure are. Let's continue to make our lives at least financially simple. Hey, y'all make it a great day.